Right, so uh, welcome everyone. I'm Leopoldo Cavaleri Gerhardinger from Brazil. I'm an oceanographer with a PhD in environment and society, and I'm currently representing the Earth System Governance project in the Early Career Researchers Network of Networks, one of the conveners organizations of this webinar series. Welcome to the second of a series of 5 webinars entitled How Does Science Translate into Policy? The first one was held a couple of weeks ago on the urban topic, cities. This one will address oceans. We'll have another one addressing natural assets, and then water, energy, food nexus, sustainable consumption and production, knowledge action networks. These are all networks that are operating within the umbrella of Future Earth. And also this series is organized by the Early Career Researchers Network of Networks. As I mentioned, this organization shelters over 20 research-based networks, mostly but not exclusively around sustainability science. And we also have had a great hand from the Young Scholars Initiative of the Institute of New Economic Thinking. So the concept binds together all these different networks around the common topic of science policy, particularly on sustainability. And the webinar is the first of hopefully more other series to come. And we hope to see you again at some later as participants or even as moderators of webinars. So the session will basically have a roundtable discussion of about 30 to 40 minutes, and then 10 to 20 minutes of questions and answers, whereby you can pose your own question into the chat box window, and we'll make sure that they will be considered if time is available in the end. The webinar is being recorded, and we welcome your thoughts and ideas. We're taking notes. We'll send the minutes afterwards so we can share with our peers. So I'll briefly introduce our guest speakers today. So we have Anna Zivian and Mona. Anna holds a PhD in environmental studies and has worked since 2009 for Ocean Conservancy, an NGO, ocean NGO that is engaged in and advocates on ocean issues, broad set of topics, including ocean systems change. Anna's academic background is interdisciplinary. She worked on environmental, agriculture, and aquaculture policy at various levels, from the local to international, working with conservation of genetic resources, science, technology studies, also a lot of experience in politics. So she was a former local elected official in the US and expert on issues of marine spatial planning, ocean climate change, and international food policy. She's also a member of Society for Conservation Biology, Marine Section Policy Committee, and of San Francisco Bay Bird Observatory Board. Thanks, Anna, for being with us. Mona Samari, she's a journalist, studied in international conflict resolution, international relations and human rights at the London School of Economics, and has over 16 years working experience related to human rights, with a special focus on the freedom of expression. In addition, Mona has extensive experience in international relations, working in conflict zones and with marginalized communities. She has worked in Tunisia during the transitional democracy period, and she's the founder of the Tunisia Environment Reporting Network, a project established in partnership with the Earth Journalism Network to build and train existing and emerging environmental journalists in the Middle East and North Africa in the wake of the Arab uprisings. Mona's campaign background also includes 10 years on the ocean conservation sector. In 2017, she joined the Earth Journalism Network as director for the West Africa Fisheries Journalism Training Project, where she's also training journalists and is in the editorial coordinator of the World Environment magazine. which has won the 2012 Green Media Awards. Well, we have two very thrilling speakers with us today. Thanks a lot for your contributions to our webinar series. So let's kick off. All right. So Anna, could you please explain what the Ocean Knowledge Action Network is and why is it different to other existing global networks on the ocean forefront? If you can maybe also tell us about your role in this organization and possibly other activities and challenges that you are involved in at the moment. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for organizing this and thanks for attending. Some of you may find some of what I say familiar because I presented a little bit on the Ocean Knowledge Action Network at the high-level scientific conference on ocean and climate and the Decade of Ocean Sciences in Paris 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago. My sense of time is a bit off, but the Ocean Knowledge Action Network was set up along with the other knowledge action networks by Future Earth. The Ocean Knowledge Action Network actually has 4 sponsor groups supporting its work that also reflect the interconnected global nature of the ocean itself. Those are Future Earth, SCORE, the Scientific Committee on Oceanic Research, WCRP, the World Climate Research Program, and IOC, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. The OceanCan has the goal of bridging disciplines and drawing experts together to seek action-focused solutions for challenges that require a multi-sectoral approach, international cooperation, and transdisciplinary research. Right now, the OceanCan is in sort of the second stage of cans. So the cans start from a conception to development to being fully constituted knowledge action networks. And right now we're in the development stage and have a development team of about 20 members. The development team of the OceanCan is currently working to develop a strategy framework to create that permanent ocean knowledge action network that can continue this work over the long term. And it brings together people with different areas of expertise from different regions. As I said, it's about 20 people from 16 countries across 6 continents with backgrounds and expertise in natural and social sciences, journalism, as with Mona, knowledge transfer, ocean advocacy, and marine conservation, and also engages early career researchers with 2 ECR members on the development team. And by bringing these areas together, so both geographic and sectoral or disciplinary, we can diversify ocean governance and management, support transformative actions by providing useful knowledge in the right format and at the right time to decision makers, facilitate transdisciplinary research, and maximize impact through best practice knowledge transfer. And by participating in international processes and projects like the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development that I think we'll be talking about a bit, and drawing our networks together, the Ocean Knowledge Action Network can both contribute to new knowledge and knowledge synthesis, as well as its application and spread or transfer for action. And that action part is, I think, what drew a lot of members to the development team and to be interested in the Knowledge Action Network. Because you know, as I was noting at that conference, you know, knowledge by itself isn't enough because knowledge doesn't translate, you know, magically to policy. And in fact, you know, the title of this series, you know, from translating science into policy, to me is a little bit misleading because there is a connection and an intertwining of science and policy. The questions that get asked have a political basis, the science question, and then the science questions that get answered have different means of coming back into policy. So I hope we get to talk about that a bit more as well. And this is, of particular interest to me, both from my research I'm mostly a social scientist, but in interdisciplinary environmental studies, and working for an advocacy and policy-based organization, Ocean Conservancy. At Ocean Conservancy, I have recently been working mostly on ocean climate change issues, engaging on both the subnational level, particularly in the US and California, and the international level through international fora like UNFCCC and IPCC. So I also worked, as Leopoldo said in the introduction, on ocean planning issues and on knowledge management briefly here at Ocean Conservancy. And if there are some questions about some of the other programs Ocean Conservancy works on, I'm happy to talk about those as well. I think I'll leave it there, and feel free to ask me any questions about local government, being an elected official, working for an NGO, and bringing sort of a weird background into marine policy, since I didn't, undergraduate was Russian and Soviet studies, and then I was a local elected official, and then I worked on agriculture policy. So you don't have to, I think there are a lot of opportunities that are not totally obvious to work in different aspects of ocean science, policy, and governance.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it's incredible, the diverse background that you share. I will certainly explore that in a bit. Thanks a lot. And also just reminding everyone that if you have questions, you can post them on a chat box window, and we will make sure to raise them up if we have time at the end. Thanks a lot, Anna. Mona, so could you please introduce your work at the Earth Journalism Network, particularly in the training of journalists to cover the crossroads of marine conservation, economic development, and the marginalized communities in West Africa?
So yes, thank you for inviting me. So the Earth Journalism Network is a network of around 5,000 journalists worldwide. It was founded by James Farn, who is a leading professor in journalism at Berkeley University. He's part of the Knight Media Center, which is known as one of the world's best media centers, and they have a branch on environmental journalism. So James Farn's vision is to basically create, let's say, an army of well-trained journalists worldwide who understand scientific concepts in a way that they can translate it for people to understand who don't have a scientific background. And so him and I already had a collaborative relationship based on the work I did in Tunisia in 2012. And so him and I were approached by the Adessian Foundation, which is a Dutch foundation which funds projects which stimulate civic participation. And they asked us to develop a project for West Africa. And so the project that him and I developed there basically focuses on two countries, which is Ghana and Senegal. The project is in 3 parts. It might sound like it's very grandiose, but it's actually very grassroots level. So the first part, the overall aspect of the project, which is kind of the driving force, is to increase the transparency around fishery policy and science and management by creating journalists who are well-trained to cover fisheries issues, because as we know, fisheries issues tend to be covered in a shroud of jargon and political intrigue and all manner of things. So people don't really understand what goes on in fisheries. So because I have a very much a right to information background, I wanted to marry in this project the whole concept of increasing transparency which would then contribute to more accountability of governments via more media coverage. But in order to do that, you have to provide journalists with the capacity to understand some of the issues. So the project was in 3 parts. The first part involves basically identifying and working with a local network of journalists in Ghana or Senegal. And we've identified one in Ghana, which is based near a big IUU fishing port, and which regroups journalists along the coast, because another aspect of the project that I wanted was to engage coastal journalists, and not the ones in the capital who have access to all the trainings. I wanted to engage some of the journalists who actually can have good connection with the fishing communities and produce more stories. So, so that is one aspect, is basically providing some seed money for a network of environmental fisheries journalists to cover fishery issues. The second part is really the story grants aspect, which is something that we've run across the region. So we've provided a call for journalists to apply for €500 grants, and they have gone off and produced stories in Sierra Leone, Togo, Benin, Ghana, Senegal. One of them has just won a very prestigious award in Togo by the French and American embassy, who've recognized it for its contribution to excellent investigative reporting. So that's one aspect. And then the third aspect is the workshops which we hold, whereby I basically try and engage the local scientific community to come and spend 2 days with the journalists during the workshop, which allows much more interaction between the journalists and the scientists. And then we then take them to the field. So we take them to a port, landing port, where there's IUU activity or where there's lots of juvenile landings. And we separate them into groups, and each one will have a theme, such as governance or IUU or juvenile landings or difficulties implementing legislation. And then they'll go off with the scientists and do their investigations, and then they'll come back and write a story. But that's kind of what we're doing at the moment in West Africa. We have a project, we have a workshop in 2 weeks' time. And yeah, I mean, it's full of challenges, but it's an interesting way to work on fisheries and journalism.
Thanks a lot. I would love to explore more of those concrete cases in the next round. So now, Anna, I would like to explore with you a little bit more about your current work on the climate change issues, and connecting to our last webinar on cities, knowing that cities are where most of the population of the planet are. So what role does science-based information about climate change currently play in policy making towards building resilient coastal cities of the future? How can this be enhanced to enable state-of-the-art knowledge-based decision-making?
So this is a question that we could probably spend several hours on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it does come back a little bit to, you know, the original question of science and policy and the interconnection of the two. Obviously, just having the information or just having good science isn't going to solve mitigation or adaptation problems alone, because it has to be in a context. But if you don't have good information, then your actions will be unfocused and not targeted. So you have to provide useful information in the right format and at the right time to decision makers. And decision makers need to be involved in deciding and advising on what kind of science they need and gets done. So it's this continual interplay between knowledge and action that's important. And also again, I think the network piece comes in terms of learning from what other jurisdictions are doing, learning from what other disciplines and scientists are doing, learning through local and traditional ecological knowledge, learning from the coastal residents themselves. For cities in particular, I think there are examples of useful ways that knowledge, information, data is playing into how cities can prepare and adapt in terms of, more locally focused sea level rise predictions, for example, work on storm surge and king tides, work on ocean acidification, where cities that have an aquaculture industry or a fisheries, have a fisheries sector, will need better to understand both how to adapt to changing ocean pH, how to prepare for that, for example, by putting the oyster spat in different places, or ensuring that the highly acidic water doesn't affect the spat at a vulnerable time. So there's targeted information where observation, monitoring, and scientific knowledge can help. But again, a lot of what we need is the information's already there, and it's finding ways to take that information into action, to look to social scientists for an understanding of the interconnection between policy and science, and to see what the obstacles are to decision making, because very often they're not knowledge-based or information-based. They're institutional, structural, equity and justice based. They come because of asymmetries of power and things like that. So understanding the range of obstacles takes both natural and social science, and then finding ways around those obstacles and making good decisions, again, takes communities, takes natural and social science as well. So it's an imbricated web, a tapestry of all of these things that has to come together and connect science and policy and communities. I think you're on mute. I at least don't hear you.
Yeah. So I like how you stress the importance, or how intricate and imbricated, intertwined the knowledge generation process is with the policy side of the interface, as we call it. And also that you were working on the coastal area, at least at the subnational level, where you have perhaps most of the population with access to information, media, internet, and so forth. So I'd like to, in contrast, explore a bit of Mona's experience working in regions, in remote places, where the availability of information through internet is different. For instance, the International Telecommunications Union, it's a special agency of UN that addresses issues of information and technologies, estimated that perhaps 47% of the 7 billion people in the planet have access to internet. In developing world, it's even less, 40%. In Africa, for instance, they estimate that only 25% of people have access to internet. And also considering the presence of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, this presents challenges of for policymakers, legislators, researchers, and so forth, practitioners, especially in the increasingly digitized world that we live. So my question for you, Mona, engaging with social media is equally relevant when working with vulnerable remote communities. How can we build appealing and evidence-based narratives at a global scale, but that truly are linked to the local realities to face the challenges of the Anthropocene? And given this huge asymmetry that we see in access and misuse of information, if you can have a word on
yeah, I think it's a paradox, because my understanding is that in Africa is kind of leading the path for developing the new wave of phone-based internet technology. So actually, because in some parts Africa has jumped the steps that perhaps we have, which is access to laptops and a laptop in each household, they've kind of gone straight to the smartphone. They are actually quite a hot spot for developing the future of that kind of technology. I know that there's been some developments in Ghana around that. So, so they will be consuming their news perhaps in a more advanced way than us further down the line. I think that radio still remains a very strong medium. You have to remember as well with some of the, well, a lot of the fishing communities, literacy is very high. So, so print is perhaps not accessible anyway. So radio still remains a very powerful communication tool. And in terms of social media, I think that a number of journalists that I've come to contact with, no matter how remote they may be, they will always have the, the internet key, plugged in. So they do have connections there. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Coming back to our attendance, I see that no question was posed yet. So please, folks, don't be shy. Just throw up your questions. We will have a session, a participative session in a couple of minutes. Welcome to leave your comments as well on the chat box. But coming back to Mona, picking up on your experience in training early career journalists. So in your experience, what does it tell you about what personal skills and types of collaborations that are key to tackle, for instance, the Agenda 2030 that suddenly falls over our heads? There are so many topics, so complex issues. So what kind of skills do you think that are important?
Well, I think that one problem with journalism in Africa, which has come up, is the quality of the reporting, and in a way, this is something which is holding them back, and which is also making some media houses or some journalists dismissed by policymakers because they're not reporting on the facts accurately enough. So this is a widespread problem. You also have to keep in mind that journalism is not a lucrative career unless you've been in the business for a long time. You're not going to make a lot of money from it. So, you have to either be extremely passionate about what you're writing about, or you will do it for a while and then you will work in an NGO as a PR person, which is more secure in terms of jobs. I mean, the salaries in Africa are very low for journalists. But having said that, there is an extremely incredible pool of talent who work day and night, who tend to have their own networks, and they're producing excellent reports. And I very much believe in peer-to-peer education. So when we have our trainings, we have a mix of people who have different backgrounds and different experiences. So for example, I brought Kenneth Wise, who is the Pulitzer Prize winner, who wrote all the stories on ocean, with us to Ghana, and he was able to share his experiences and give investigation tips to journalists who are located in very remote parts of Ghana, for example. So, so to answer your question, I believe in a mix. I think a mix is important. But the struggles remain the same in terms of journalism, which is, trying to convince the editor and trying to get money basically to do a research trip. So yeah, I don't know what, yeah.
Yeah, sure. And can you give us an actual example of how journalism connected science policy in the context of tackling social and environmental injustice in coastal cities that you've worked, perhaps unfolding a little bit more on your experience right now?
Yeah, I have a very good example actually. So this Ghanaian journalist who's got her own radio show, she approached me and she wanted to do a story on dynamite fishing. Because dynamite fishing is very prevalent in certain parts of Ghana, and because the situation is so dire, when you go to some of the ports in Ghana, there's no fish. There's either a dynamite caught fish for sale, so it's bloodied fish, or there is fish which is frozen, bought off a Chinese trawler, which is sold, which is an illegal fish. Actually, both are illegal, but the dynamite and the frozen fish. So what we did with our journalist is we encouraged her to work with a specialist in toxicology, in a toxic background who can understand all of the different toxic elements. They found, they got hold of some fish that was caught via dynamite. And then they ran a whole bunch of lab tests where they detected carbide, DDT, arsenic, phosphorus, and which, as you know, are very bad for people's health. And she then had a 30-minute radio program where she talked about her findings, and she talked about the scientific element, and she brought the scientists and so on. And so perhaps 30 minutes after the broadcast, the radio station was stormed by a bunch of very angry chief fishermen who literally, broke the door down and were extremely angry, and they wanted to know where she got her information from, could not believe it, thought it was a government conspiracy, because you have to understand that the way people can see science, just because it's science doesn't mean for people that it's neutral or it hasn't got some kind of political angle. So she did a very good job of explaining how she worked, of introducing and basically presenting all of the evidence of all of the toxins that were found, and they actually understood, which was very good. They didn't understand through government bans of dynamite fishing, but they understood through this radio program, and I guess through the neutrality of the journalists, that they needed to get a grip with the people that were selling dynamite caught fish in their fishing community. Because what was happening was that those that were dynamite fishing were not selling to their own communities, they were taking it to another communities. They were happy to poison someone else's fishing community, but not their own. So I think that's a good example of how science and science-based journalism with the socioeconomic impact angle can actually reach out to people much more than policies can sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's an interesting case. And also, if you can share some links afterwards with us, we would be very happy to include them on the minutes so people can access these issues with more detail. Also for you, Anna, on the examples that we are touching upon here, it would be excellent. Hi guys, so if you have questions again on the box, we are waiting for your suggestions. I have one colleague here, Gordon, which would like to give us a brief intro about a project that he's working on responsible research. Let's see if we can jump him in a few minutes. But now coming back to Anna, I would like Anna to perhaps go think big now. If you can give us a very panoramic view of what is all about with the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science. and perhaps bring your most candid and critical impression about the challenges and opportunities it poses for us, especially for those of us that are thinking of developing a career in the science policy interface. I think planning and thinking in a decadal approach is quite useful for that. But if you can briefly explain us what that is.
I can try. I just did want to note that it looks like Gordon has to leave. So maybe if he wants to do 2 minutes on his project before I answer that, that would give him that opportunity.
Yeah, sure. Jump in, Gordon. Well, you're most welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity just to give an elevator pitch of my 2 projects in 3 minutes, just to tweak anyone's interest, so that any questions afterwards you can email me. So currently I'm the coordinator of the RING project, which is Responsible Research and Innovation Network globally. It's a global project that's investigating the overlap of the European model of what's called responsible research, what's happening in the rest of the world. So the responsible research is the 6 pillars of gender equality, open access, public engagement, or public inclusive engagement, STEM, and then research that's conducted responsibly and research that's conducted environmentally. And of course, there's ethics and integrity. Sorry, I forgot that one. Future Earth is involved in the project via the Earth Systems Governance project. UNESCO is the lead partner, and we are, I suppose, looking at all stakeholders and how they view responsible research in the 5 global regions, with particular emphasis on Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and trying to determine what they're doing best and how they're doing. What new concepts in responsibility that they are maybe doing. We've got to focus particularly on 4 elements or domains of ICT, energy, bioeconomy, and waste management, but we are also looking at other areas. So this is a general project which has overlap of course in all projects and sectors. We do have a partner or subcontracted partner, the World Federation of Science Journalists, who operate out of Canada, that will be contributing in a significant way to our dissemination and communication efforts. So this is another overlap with what seems to be a strong journalistic component here of your of this current talk today. Then the reason why I met Leopoldo initially is that I'm also an ocean energy economics engineer based in the Marine Centre in Ireland, Marine Renewable Energy Centre. I have led the marine investment in the blue economy H2020 project for 1.5 years, and I will be submitting a new project for Blue Growth 5 next year on the multi-purpose platforms and multiple use of space, which is quite a technical project in commercialization, but there will be a work package on the public engagement, environmental barriers, societal barriers, as well as the responsibility element to the multiple use of the sea.
That's interesting, Gordon.
So
thanks a lot.
These are the 2 projects that I wanted to report to.
Thanks a lot. Gordon is part of the iCorsa, one of the 20 networks that engaged with the Early Career Research Network of networks. So if you can go to our Facebook fan page or drop us an email with your intentions of joining one of these networks and engaging with discussions related to the topic of responsible research, polar research, ocean governance, and so forth and so forth. So you are welcome to join us there. Thanks, Gordon, for your elevator talk. And now coming back to Hannah's big thing. So what do you think about a decade in our lives? What can we do concretely to be inspired and inspire this flow?
So I think this is a really important opportunity for early career researchers and professionals working on the ocean climate, ocean science policy interface, because, as you noted, it is on a decadal scale. It is intended, it's a very, it's a very ambitious project. I mean, the goal is to reverse the cycle of decline in ocean health. That's how the UN is pitching it. It is also intended to have science that leads to action, and it's intended to be bottom up. So it's very ambitious. It will, I think, only be as good as the participation that it's able to get. So a big part of this is going to be the regional workshops, the topical workshops, but also what we as researchers and activists bring to the decade. So there are a lot of opportunities, I think, for programs and projects that all of us are working on to feed into the decade. And I think it will be important for us to bring those to the decade, both through the executive planning group that is going to be working on how the decade is rolled out. That group, I think, should be announced within a couple of weeks. And I think there will be some opportunities to interact with members of that executive planning group. And then through the formal regional and stakeholder processes, as well as through informal engagements and sending, research results and action opportunities to people working within the decade. So it's incredibly ambitious. I think I'm optimistic that it comes at the right time and that it can achieve results. I mean, I think we are at a critical moment in terms of making sure that, ocean health, ocean prosperity can be achieved, or if not maintained, at least can continue to move forward. I would say that it's a good time to think about how your research might tie to the decade, because, as I said, there will be opportunities. I think, practically there will be funding opportunities tied to the decade in terms of national science federations and funders, as well as potentially foundation funding. As I was saying, I think for us to move to action that has successful results, I mean, we need awareness. The decade can help with that. We need finance and funding. We need political leadership. So making this tie between what the decade does and shows and what elected officials are interested in, need industry support. I think Gordon's project is an interesting example of looking at the connections. I think marine spatial planning is an interesting way of looking at those connections. We need solid institutional structures. The decade draws on one of those, and obviously science and knowledge that the decade is focused around. So I think, from an Ocean Can perspective, we're very much planning to be engaged and bring sort of the network and action focus to the decade. For early career researchers, I'd say there are a number of ways to feed into that, and it's a valuable sort of umbrella for the work that all of us are doing.
Thanks, Anna. I'll come back to you in a minute. I have here a couple of questions to Mona from our attendants. One, I'll try to frame them into one phrase here, one question. So they want to hear more of you about how can engage? How can scientists and activists in developing countries use journalism to further their cause, and how to engage more journalists talking about environment issues? So these are questions by Taraka, Sirisan, and Keiko from Brazil.
Okay. I didn't hear everything because the line was breaking up, but from what I hear, it's basically the question is, what can people do? Sorry, could you repeat the question, because I couldn't hear it very well.
Yeah, I'm so suffering fluctuations here, but yeah, both questions are about how to engage more journalism into environmental issues and in activism and advocacy. What has been your experience, and what also can we do to further the causes of scientists?
Right. Okay. Hopefully, I'll answer the question you asked. So I think one thing that's coming through in terms of science is that that we basically science needs to communicate much better. So I think that the research, the quality of the research is there. The science is there, but obviously there's something happening. There's a disconnect because the science, for example, is clearly showing that a number of species are overfished, that we can't keep going down the trajectory that we're going. Yet policymakers are not necessarily taking that into account when they're putting together management decisions on certain species, and journalists can't get hold of these, reports unless there's a PR team that's really pushing things forward and knows how to pitch those kinds of science-based stories. So I personally don't think that the problem is that there's not enough science. I think that the science is there, but the communication needs to improve, especially in the post-truth world that we're going to be finding ourselves in, where science is very fact-based, but which can be seen by people in developing countries during negotiations, for example, as a politicized tool as well. And I think that that's something that, people need to keep in mind, that, science can be seen, even ocean science, even, research on species can be seen or used as a political tool to either increase or decrease quotas. So the whole system needs to change. I think that there needs to be, and this is not just me thinking this, but there needs to be much more engagement from the global south. We need a lot more scientists from the coastal communities who are experiencing devastating overfishing. They need to be able to contribute much more at the negotiation level and at the international level. And whether that's more, I would say we need to broaden the scope of scientists and increase the communication.
Thanks. Is a limitation of the freedom of press also a real issue in ocean journalism space? Asks Kevin from Nigeria.
The freedom of the press. Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, when I devised the project to decide what country to do it in West Africa to have the most impact, and also to not get killed while doing it, I did a comparison of whether they had a libel law, a defamation law, what the freedoms were. And we selected the country to work in because we had a very small amount of time, which was the most favorable for journalism. I think that, a lot of our journalists in Ghana, however, when they're covering issues to do with organized crime and IUU fishing, they have definitely practiced self-censorship. And so one way to get over self-censorship is to have more people writing or reporting on the issue, which is why we have a network, and we've done investigations on transshipment issues. So it's not just one journalist speaking, but it's a collective of journalists speaking. So that's that's one way ahead of it. I think that, you know, but nevertheless, you know, if an issue goes further up, like it involves the president or the vice president, or it involves a transboundary important criminogenic group, then yes, there will be self-censorship there. And that's just something that we have to let the journalists organically want to overcome that. That's not something that I will force them to do, because it has to very much come from within the country on how far they want to go within their own country to report on issues.
Thanks, Mona. I'll come back to you in a minute. We have about 10 minutes, right, Atulia? So we have time for a few interactions still. Anna, I would like to put forward a question by Seth Schultz. He is part of the Urban Knowledge Action Network development team, and he was one of our guest speakers in the first webinar. Well, we probed him to send some questions or issues for us in the Ocean Can to discuss in this webinar. So he asks, roughly 1/3 of all the garbage in the oceans is coming from about 10 megacities. Are they doing anything in the Ocean Can to address this issue and to make sure that other cities don't follow this bad behavior in terms of dumping garbage into the ocean? What would be your answer to that?
So one quick logistical question. I thought this was going to end in 2 minutes, not 10. I did have a meeting get canceled, so I can stay on a little longer, but I'm not sure everyone else can. But in terms of Seth's question, the Ocean Can is trying not to duplicate efforts, and there are a lot of ongoing efforts on marine debris and plastic waste. And I think what we can best do as the Ocean Can is to link up those efforts and to make sure that people are aware of the different ongoing questions around marine debris and marine plastics. That said, Ocean Conservancy has a trash-free seas program and actually worked on some of the reports that led to these conclusions that a lot of the marine debris is coming from particular locations, a few particular locations. And one of the responses, and this is an interesting thing to think about, is where land-based solutions affect ocean issues. And I think you can see that on climate change, you can see that on hypoxia and deoxygenation and dead zones, you can see it on marine debris. So one thing that cities can work on is good waste management. Another thing cities can work on is regulating the most common types and most harmful types of plastics that do harm in the ocean. For example, plastic bags, cigarette butts, straws. Another thing that cities can do is, obviously cleanups are not the best solution because they only clean up waste that has already entered, but they can encourage engagement and they can clean waste off of from urban areas. Stormwater management can also be a way that cities engage. And finally, there are examples like the Baltimore Water Wheel of collecting marine debris from cities before it enters the ocean. So that's not waste management. It's not a post-beach cleanup. It's a way of collecting marine debris before it enters the ocean. So that's a slightly long answer.
Sure.
So I'll let people comment on that or have other questions on that.
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned that we had 10 minutes because we started 5 minutes late, but never mind if you have to leave. It has been very good. Anyways, we have run out of questions. So If nobody has any burning issue, I would like to invite you for perhaps some final thoughts, and then we can come to a closing.
I would just encourage everyone who isn't already a member of the Future Earth Open Network to join, and to join the ocean section, to continue these discussions. I'm really happy that you have set up this webinar series, because I think it's a great way to introduce the work of the CANs, but also to show how these different issues are really interconnected. So thanks for doing it, thanks for working on it, and I really also encourage early career professionals to engage, and feel free to reach out to me or Mona or Leopoldo or Kewe, who are all on this call, to ask, figure out how you can be more engaged, or to ask us any further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks a lot. That's a great idea. So we will paste in a minute the link for the open network, the Future Earth platform for communications, and we can engage also using this platform. Mona, if you want to leave us a final thought, you're welcome.
Yes, I guess I would say that just on the whole subject of perhaps maybe finding opportunities to work with local journalists. So especially in coastal towns. So if you have a research mission somewhere, to perhaps get in touch with some of the local journalists. One of the issues I found in covering a science-based ocean story is, number one, the fact that the journalist doesn't really know where to start and doesn't really understand the topic. And number two, it's a lack of funding for the field trip. So as you can imagine, journalists very much enjoy going on field trips, but that's also something that maybe their editors can't find the budget for. So I think it'd be quite a nice thing to basically look out for some journalists when you do any field research, and perhaps integrate them into your work. I don't see many journalists that would say no to spending 2 or 3 days with a scientist, studying something in more depth. So perhaps that would be a final thought.
All right. Marina asks here if there are other media platforms that we could that cover sustainability and oceans. I just it occurred to me that Open Channels, it's a good venue for you to check out, and they are always collating these informations and new science papers and so forth. So yeah, it has been a thrilling session. Thanks, Anna, again. Thanks, Atulia, for putting this together. All the organization partners, Mona. Thanks a lot. I would like to stress that our next webinar will be on water, energy, and food nexus. The session on the 2nd of October from 14 to 15 UTC time. That we will have Aditi Mukerish, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, and Pamela Katik from the Natural Resource Institute. And it will be moderated by Felipe Taravares, also a member of our Early Career Research Network of Networks. And with that, we come to a closing. Have a great day for you, a great night over, or great morning, whatever you are. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye.